Hi, everybody, and welcome to my presentation on Purposeful Planning in Physical Education. My name is Jace Ferguson, and I'm honored to be part of this Phys Ed Summit for 2019. I've done a few Phys Ed Summits before in the past, and it's always a great opportunity to share what's going on out there and also to share and hear what else is going on in the world of Phys Ed. We have a list of just some amazing people who are sharing their ideas with what's going on in their world right now, and this is a great opportunity to share that and be part of that. So let's actually get into a little bit of who I am. So let's get this show on the road. So obviously my name is Jace Ferguson. I got my Bachelor of Education degree from University of Alberta back in 2006. And I also received my Master's of Science in Recreation and Sports Science from Ohio University in 2013. The focus of my thesis was actually into long-term athlete development and how does physical literacy fit into that. From about 2016 to 2015, I was teaching physical education throughout Alberta. There's a few schools I was at the beginning of my career, and then I spent a large chunk of my career at a 7 through 12 high school in Northern Alberta. And I also became part of the Health and Physical Education Council of Alberta. So I started off as just being a regional representative, working with teachers, putting on workshops. But then I also got involved in the executive where I was the vice president of pedagogy and curriculum development, and got to really kind of talk and see where everybody's coming at in terms of where is Phys Ed going? What does it need to do to meet the needs of our teachers and our students? But then in 2015, my wife and I decided to take a risk, and we actually left Canada. And for the past 4 years, we're at the Universal American School in Dubai, where I was physical education. I actually had to teach kindergarten for 1 year, which was an interesting experience, but an amazing opportunity. I was also our grade 9 grade level coordinator, so dealing with some pastoral needs of students, but also still in the physical education realm and sports science classes as well. At the end of this year, we decided to make a move, and we're actually in the middle of moving from Dubai to Macau. All of our stuff is in a metal container on a boat floating through the Indian Ocean to Macau right now while we're sitting here having our summer in New Brunswick, Canada. And we're going to be starting in this fall here at the International School of Macau, and we're super excited for that. And I also run Tin Can Physical Education, which kind of shares some ideas what's going on, a blog post of what's going on, sharing some of the action research I've been doing as a professional in hopes of creating that excellent learning environment for my students. Some ways you can find me. You can find me on social media. You can take a look at my webpage, which is tincanphysed.wordpress.com. A lot of blog posts, share some what's going on, share some of the projects I'm working with. You can find me on Twitter at Grand Muchacho. If you're kind of wondering where that name came from, I did a podcast with Dale Sidebottom about a year or so ago, just about the enjoyment of profession. And one of the things we talked about is why I have my name, and the story behind it is a very fond memory I have, and it's just kind of is that anchor to remind me of, okay, this is why I'm in this profession in the first place. This is who I am. On Twitter, I share some of my thoughts on pedagogy. We also get involved in some PE chats and share some of the content that's going out. Also find me on Instagram at the Mr. Ferguson, where just share what's happening daily on a daily basis, what my students are doing, things we're working on, all that other good stuff. So before we get really into the nitty-gritty of this, one thing we're going to ask you is to get your phone out. You're going to be seeing these QR codes, and that's that little data dot thing that's on the left side of your screen, and that's a QR code. If you have an iPhone and you open up your camera app, you just scan this code, and it actually takes you to the folder where all of these resources can be found. If you don't have an iPhone, you can use a QR scanner app, and this can access the materials from the presentation. So as you're watching this on a laptop, you just take out your phone, scan it, you have access to all the materials that's there right at your fingertips. So I want to ask you that if you do have a phone, pull it out. You can have access using these QR codes. Now, what are we going to be talking about today? One thing I want to talk about is address some of the challenges we face in physical education, break down the concept of purpose, application of this concept to physical education, and then how does this change how I structured my purposeful planning. So this has been something I've been working with the past 3-4 years, just fine-tuning and making it not only teacher-friendly, but student-friendly as well. Because the whole idea behind this planning with purpose is we want to enrich the experience for our students. But this happens through some trial and error. But the past 4 years, I've been working on this process. So I'm kind of excited to share with you how I've come through with this. But let's talk about some challenges that we all face in physical education. Number one challenge is the lack of engagement. The value of physical activity has been decreased, and we see that everywhere. Not only do we see it through schools, through funding, through planning procedures, we see that through society as well. Just as I'm even home for the summer, just the opportunities for students just to get out, or kids just get out and play, it's decreasing. There's parks, but what are we doing to get the kids to these parks? And more importantly, what are we doing to get adults involved? Number one thing is adult involvement, parental involvement. It's just that lack of engagement, because the scary thing is the levels of just like sedentary behavior are increasing. It's a screen culture. There's iPads, iPhones, laptops, everything that we can do. And we're focusing on these, and we're losing that valuable outside playtime. Another part of it's that professional accountability. We as physical educators fight the stereotype. If you haven't seen Mr. Woodcock, it's a movie with Billy Bob Thornton, and he promotes the stereotypical view of what a physical education teacher should be. I'm going to use this term to describe it. They describe how a gym teacher should be. And I use that term very, very purposefully. It's that stereotype. He shows up in a tracksuit. It's kind of that place where students are ridiculed. It's not a safe learning environment. And it's often for some people, some of their most feared memories from high school and junior high. And we have to fight that stereotype all the time. Not only do we have to fight with that in terms of getting our programs to see value, for funding, for support from administration, but it's also kind of easy to fall into the stereotype, because bottom line is play can be very, very simple. A phys ed lesson can be quite easy. You roll a ball, we're going to play this game today. And very play-based can be very, very easy to do, where purpose and development is something that's elaborate. It takes time, it takes resources, and that's something we have to fight with, because we all are very busy people. It's because a lot of us are also required to do after school activities. So where's our planning to do this elaborate development of students? And it's also easy to focus on what we're doing and not understanding why we're doing it in the first place. On Facebook, there's a lot of resource sharing going out there. Like, here's a lesson plan, here's these activities. It's great to have those things. Those are awesome resources. But we also don't get stuck into what we're doing today. And we miss the opportunity to nail down the importance of why we're doing this, why we're doing these activities, these lessons, these progressions. Because it's really easy to focus on what we're doing at the time. And the last one is we're constantly fighting for importance. Schools are focusing on test scores and not the holistic student development. I just came from an IB school, and at the end of the day, schools are ranked, especially when it comes to private education and international communities, schools are ranked based on test scores. In the United States, schools are ranked, teachers are evaluated based on test scores, but those numbers don't show the holistic picture of the student. I don't know if there's a system out there that can even do that yet. And we're constantly fighting that, because what's going to help test scores? It's going to be their math. It's going to be their core subject marks. It's not the one subject where as a person, as a human being, this is something that's going to carry with them throughout life. PD and resources are often cut and limited by some schools because they lack to see the importance. They lack to see what the benefit of having a structured and supported physical education program can have on test scores and on students' wholeness, wellness, and well-being. So we're often fighting for that importance of our profession. But this is what got me thinking into why. So I was always dealing with these struggles, and then I actually read a book called Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And this book just had a lot of light bulb moments go off for me, because this infographic just kind of actually summarizes the book very, very simplistically in a few images and ideas. We often forget this, and people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Good administration, they walk in, they see a lesson, they see you can manage it, they look at what you're doing, but they'll ask those questions, okay, why are we doing this? What's the enduring understanding? What's the bigger connection to the lifelong learning aspect? People and students buy why you do it, and it's very simple to often miss that mark. We all know why we do it, but do we communicate it out effectively? Because few people do. If you look at the one takeaway that I took away from this is the concept of golden circle. And I'm actually going to go into this a little bit more further here, is the golden circle was a great idea. And it actually changed how I looked at even my planning, even my lesson and unit and year structure. Is it's really simple to go at that what. The what is the one thing we should actually be doing last, but it's easy to look at it first is what are you doing? So what the hell do you do? Okay, we're all physical education teachers. We teach kids these things. Perfect. How do you do that? That's one thing where it gets a little bit more tricky is, okay, I do this by looking at different dimensions of physical literacy. I look at that by exploring different sports and games and cultural activities. But the one question is, why do you do it? Why is this important? And that's always something we often struggle with because we don't often take the time to solidify our why. Why are we in this? Why are we doing this? Why is this an important lesson? One of the things that I love students to ask, but also shows me that I'm missing something, is when a student asks me, why am I doing this, Mr. Ferguson? It's a great question to ask, but it's told me that I missed communicating something somewhere along the line. I missed the importance of why we're doing this, and I missed communicating out the bigger picture. And that really got me thinking about, as I read this book, okay, let's start with why. Let's really solidify the importance of what we're doing first. How are we going to go through this? And then what are going to be the learning experiences that come with it? And I've actually flipped my planning process and my thinking process behind it. So in the past, I wasn't always thinking this way. In the past, I often focused on the what. I was planning focused on the day-to-day. Like every new teacher, you're just swamped. You're new in the profession, you're passionate, but it's just it's things you didn't learn in university that you kind of weren't ready for. Planning was based on the day-to-day, and more effort I put in more effort to finding lessons and drills I could use in class. I would often brush over the how. So long-term planning didn't communicate the how effectively. This how was also teacher focused and lacked student and stakeholder participation. I would still be planning long term. I had a good idea where I was going down the line, but I wasn't really communicating, okay, how is this being effective with student learning? And the last thing I was doing is the why was a secret. I understood why physical education was important. I understood it, but I often forgot to explain to students and parents, and I almost left it to them to figure it out. It was almost that assumption that students are going to figure it out in class, communicate out to the parents, but never really made it evident in my planning. I was often reacting to that. Well, why are we doing this question? It was to me that really solidified the idea is I'm missing communicating out the bigger picture and the importance of my lessons. And to show that, this is what my year planning used to look like. Obviously, you can take a look at it. Okay, where are we at in terms of dates, times, and what we're doing? Nowhere in any of this does it tell me a bigger idea, okay, why am I doing this? How is this connecting to lifelong learning? In here, I can't see any of that. I look at this now and I look at, okay, number of classes, all these things, which was great for me at the time. It really helped me organize and structure, okay, here's my resources, here's what's going on. But it missed that enduring understanding. It really missed communicating where we're going with this, why we're doing this. As I look into my unit planning, again, lessons were planned out. Okay, I was going to do the dates. I had my facilities, I had my focus areas. I was looking at the safety considerations. I was looking at my objectives. I was looking at, again, the what am I doing with this? What I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, what am I going to be teaching? The focus is purely on the what. And it would miss that bigger understanding again. It missed that enduring understanding piece where why are we doing this and why is this important for the bigger picture? Again, this was not wrong. This was where I was at the time. I still really enjoyed teaching. The students at the time said they were great lessons, but I was missing that enduring understanding piece. And that was something to me as I read that book and as I came through my own profession is I missed communicating that why for most of my career. So why would I make a change? After reading the book, I was like, I need to make something different. I need to change at how I'm looking at things. The first one is the professional challenge. I wanted to hold myself more accountable to quality and meaningful planning. Bottom line is I wanted to make quality and meaningful physical education experiences for every student. I had to really take a look at, okay, what do I need to change? And this book actually was one of the things I used to help guide that process. This has also increased efficiency and proficiency. One thing that most of us have experienced is as we're teachers, we also become parents. So as I became a parent, I need to look at, okay, how am I going to communicate this why to my students? But how am I going to do this efficiently and proficiently? How am I going to do this and keep that work-family life balance? Because when you become a parent, your priorities change. And I'm not going to stay at the school for 12 hours a day because that takes time away from my family. So that professional challenge of being efficient while communicating out this message of why. I also wanted to see an increase in student engagement. I wanted to have participation rates high, but I wanted to see it with a meaningful understanding. And a lot of my lessons, they were designed to get maximum participation rates. So all the students would be participating very, very often. There'd be 0 students not engaged, not participating. But I was missing that meaningful part. Kids could easily just go through the motions with it. And I wanted to make it more meaningful and engaging for those students that were just going through the motions. Like, how do I bring meaning into this participation? And I wanted to see an increase in student progress. As I did my master's, this kind of opened the door to the idea of behind physical literacy development, because as we developed the concept of physical literacy and all the tools needed to be physically literate, that opens more doors for lifelong activity. Instead of just focusing on the athletic aspects, the fitness aspects, the movement aspects, physical literacy looks at a wide range of things. I'm going to get into that a little bit later. This would also help me close previous gaps in development and understanding. What happens to those students that come into my class and they're not at a level where they should be? How do I help and serve that student so they can experience progress and success and get back on track? So those are kind of the 3 reasons why I would make a change and change things forward. So how can this be applied? After thinking about the why, looking at everything, how can this be applied? And almost kind of came down to this structure. With this structure, the first thing we have to have is you need to have a vision. You need to know and have a clear understanding what you're striving or why you're doing what you're doing. What is your overall goal? And from that, it kind of goes into 2 different areas where we look at assessment, then we look at a developmental planning. The whole assessment development aspect is a totally different webinar, and I'm not going to talk about it much today. That's a different webinar that I have. But another one is developmental planning. That's what we're going to focus on today, is how we're going to go through the developmental planning, unit lesson planning, how do I do it, and then reflecting the process and the power behind that. So creating a department program vision, your first thing you need to do, which is often probably the most difficult, is really understanding your why, creating your why. What is going to be the driving force behind everything you do? What is your thing you're going to constantly tie back to? The first thing you need to look at is what's the research saying? It's like you need to base your why on sound research. So there's a lot of research out there. There's tons of great programs out there. Look at different models and what best fits your student needs. Not what best fits your needs as a teacher, but what fits your needs as students. And then take a look at this, okay, what will it look like? If we're going to make this into a structure, if we're going to take this idea and concept and make it give us some sort of shape, what would it look like? And that often is the most difficult part, because having us an idea of why we're doing this and breaking it down into what is this going to look like, that's also a difficult part as well. The third thing is unpacking it. So you need to share your newfound information and vision with your team and unpack it. The one thing that I found with this is the unpacking process isn't, okay, we're getting home from a vacation, we open up our suitcases and throw our stuff back. We got to throw our stuff, put it where it's supposed to be, come back, try it on, make sure it fits, then put it back. If it doesn't fit well, we need to look at, okay, how do we make this fit better for us? How do we make this fit better for our students? And then the last piece is you need to remodel your new shared vision. So collaboratively create this new model with your department and share this vision with your department, because it's not only you that's going to be teaching this. And coming back to this why, it's your entire teaching staff and the people you work with. Those are the things that make a program great, is everybody's on the same understanding as why is this program, why is this lesson, why is this class important? So as we did those things and we went through these 4 steps, the first thing I was looking at is long-term athlete development. So for some of the sound research I looked at was taking a look at this. So out of Canada came Sport for Life, and their goal is to have all Canadians active for life. This could be sport, this could be recreation, this could be fitness. They wanted all Canadians active for life. But this didn't just happen overnight. This just doesn't happen here. But also, we need to think about it. What are those people who are excellence level athletes? How is this going to benefit them? How can they be part of this process? Because it's not just developing an elitist program, developing a holistic community as well. So it actually goes through some of the great developmental. It even starts at infant and goes through developmental stages. And even in there throws in the idea of remedial physical literacy. What happens to someone if they're not where they're supposed to be at a certain benchmark age? How do we support them? How do we keep them active for life? What about those people who are athletes? And what if they decide to leave the realm of athletics? How do they fit back in this model? So Sport for Life Canada actually spent a lot of time developing this. And actually each kind of athletics program has taken this and developed it into their own developmental. Like Hockey Canada has done this, but actually I wanted to show you what curling has done with this. So every province has their own organization, and this is from Curling BC, where it even starts at active start at the top of it and works all the way down to creating athletes who can compete at elite level. It's just a great framework to show, okay, what sort of things does a coach need to work at? What sort of things does a program need to have in place so that athletes can develop at these rates? How can we progress our athletes forward and get them involved? But also another thing I like to see in this is that athletes with disabilities, how do we involve everyone in the process? It's not just the elitist, we're going to build the best athletes in the world, but how do we build the best athletic community in the world? And that's really the kind of the driving force behind it. Another piece of research that came out was I took a look at Dean Dudley's conceptual model of observed physical education, physical literacy. And he kind of takes physical literacy and breaks it down into 4 different domains. As we're talking about it, he describes physical literacy can be found in 4 domains. There's the movement competency, there's the critical understanding piece, motivation and behavior aspect, personal and social development. The whole concept of physical literacy is that the student has the motivation, competence, and understanding to be physically active for life. And Dean Dudley further breaks this down. It's like, okay, what does that look like? This is what movement competency looks like. This is what critical understanding looks like. And he's broken it down even further. And it was a great read and kind of helped give us the foundations for, okay, how can we assess and how can we instruct the development of students along this journey of physical literacy? Another piece that came out was the New South Wales has a whole entire physical literacy continuum. And you can't really see it in this, but it goes from kindergarten all the way up to the end of year 10. And they kind of use the same idea. So they chunked it up into 4 domains, which is movement competencies, tactical movement, motivation and behavioral skills, and then social and community aspects. So they're kind of taking the ideas of, we're going to break this down into 4 areas. And they provided benchmarks where students should be at in terms of certain age ranges. This is where students should be at the end of year 4. This is where they should have been at in year 3. And when I saw this, it was a great piece to help guide planning and practice. Elementary teachers feed into the middle school teachers feed into the high school. This gives a great framework as to, okay, this is what students should be at. This is developmentally appropriate and gives all of us kind of more focus and towards our planning and development of lessons and activities. So we took all those things after a few meetings, after unpacking all this, looking at the research, talking about why we're doing this, and ultimately we had to create a vision. So our program last year took a look at, okay, why do we want to do this, and what do we want our students to walk away with? When they leave us, what should they be able to do? So we took the ideas like we want our students to be both develop physically, socially, and mentally, who understand the value of an active lifestyle and the benefits of being a lifelong active learner. We didn't want them to be the best athletes. We didn't want them to be able to tell us how to do a jump serve in volleyball. We wanted them to tell us the benefits of being active for life. We wanted them to tell us why we need to be active. Why is this an importance? We really started to change our thinking behind that. To support this, we actually took the Sport for Life model and changed it to what our students were like. What type of things should our program look like to make this work? What sort of things should we have in place? We actually started taking a lot of developmental frameworks and the developmental stages and applying it to our classes. So we started, because we're a K-12 school, so we had the opportunity to work with all the teachers throughout all the ranges of the school and start getting a more of a focus behind it. So we started looking at developmental phases. Okay, what should be done in our physical education classes? What should be done in our intramurals? And also, how can our athletics program be part of this as well? We started to look at where do we want our school to be at? Where's our end point? And this gave us something to strive towards. So this is our overall vision. From that vision, we need to get more specific. So we started to look at developmental planning. As you looked in that diagram, you saw that there's certain grades doing certain things. And in this, we had to break this down even more. So like the foundation to this was, okay, why are we doing this and how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to do this by creating a movement culture. Passion for movement, positive climate, student-centered, expertise, and engagement. How is that going to look across the entire school? So we have our elementary school, middle school, high school, intramurals, and all of them build the pillars to support physical literacy for life. We look at elementary school, which is the introduction to physical literacy, and all the smaller parts break down even further into the focus as to what should be done, what sort of things should we be striving for within that age range. So introducing physical literacy, fun and participation, introduction to sports, and it kind of goes through that. But one thing you're going to see is that if you look at grade 7 and 8 and then look at grade 9, is developing physical and sport capacities are in both sections. Here we have our vertical alignment because what's happening in middle school is now being completed in the high school. The things that are happening here are going to be passed on to that next level. So we need to have that vertical alignment. We need to have that collaboration. And this really gave us a reason to do those things. So changing our structure just really helped us have that whole purposeful planning. Okay, why are we doing this in the first place? Again, everything going back to the idea of physical literacy for life. Why are we doing this? We want to be active for life. There's our why again. And these are our guiding practices and values. So taking a look at Dudley's research, we decided to look at, okay, what are the 4 things that we're going to be seeing in almost every PE class? Well, we're looking at things like movement development, value of physical activity, understanding why we're doing this, and cooperation and social development. We wanted to see that in every PE class. So we made this a really focal point of our instructional practices, because for us to have this value of being active for life, we need to use the tools as professionals to do this. So we actually broke down, okay, what does movement development look like? Okay, is it stability skills, object control skills, locomotive skills, and combination skills? What does value of physical activity look like? Is it engagement, it's influence, it's communication, contribution, cooperation? We broke everything down so that we can actually take a look at our instructional practices and make sure that we're doing things with that purpose. Going back to that why. This is how we're going to be doing this, but why are we doing this is always, again, evidence in this. So there we have our department program and vision. Looking at the assessment. So this obviously has to play a key into it because assessment's a big part of the how. How are we going to be communicating that progress is happening with our students? How are we going to be knowing that learning is happening? So as we developed our assessment, we looked at types of different assessment strategies. We looked at which one fits the need to communicate our progress. Traditional assessment, there's a place for that. And I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm saying that it has its place and it has its purpose. It's skills focused, teacher centered, assessment learning focused. So this is a way to communicate out to students what they have learned. But it's missing the how are you learning? How are you doing along this process? Look at standards-based assessment, so recent requests for accountability. So this is us tying PE teachers back into our standards. Okay, you're doing this lesson for a reason. You're tying it to a purpose. Standards-based could be teacher-student focused. But after we looked at, okay, we have our enduring understanding and our value. we took our assessment practice and we actually started linking it to values we wanted our students to have. We didn't want them to be able to tell us certain things. We wanted them to express certain values, and we wanted to develop those values through our assessment practices. So these are the enduring understandings that students would be having for life. These were very student-focused, it was student-friendly language, and it was made in such a way where students can look at this and understand, I'm here, I need to be doing this to move forward in my journey. So what do they need to do to be successful? But it's custom made with our students in mind. This won't, if you were to take this and put it into another school, it may work, but it may not be purposeful because you're lacking, what do your students need? So with all that research, with all those ideas, we're taking the value of physical activity, critical understanding, or movement development, social development, throwing in the shape standards as well. And this is our high school criteria for assessment statements. This is what we use on a day-to-day basis to determine how we're learning, where we're at in our journey. If we look at these, and you'll find this link to it's inside the folder with the presentation, is it breaks down in the wording into growth statements. If you're at the apprentice level is different from the expert level, but the expert level is crafted in such a way where the language in there helps the students understand the difference between the two and how they can move forward. And that's the biggest thing with assessment, is how can it be used to help students learn and move forward? This is also breaking it down even further. So this is just the one column of our criteria statements, and this is actually what we'd be using out for students, and this makes things a little bit more clear. Not only does it give us the descriptors, okay, to be a 7 or a 6, you could be doing these things, but specific tasks, the things to do that, the actual physical content. How do you demonstrate engagement? How do you demonstrate influence, communication, contribution, cooperation? All those kind of specific tasks and values are the foundation for all the points in those grade descriptors. Chooses, reflects, and refines an appropriate level of challenge and engagement. Right there, we're looking at engagement levels. Are they on task? How did the students do that? And then how do they kind of grow from there? Very student focused in terms of where can they move forward and how can this help them progress in their learning. So there's our assessment. I know it was a quick glance over it. It could be a totally other webinar, but we're here to talk about developmental planning. And the only reason why I touched on assessment development is because that assessment criteria was a major plays a big role in developmental planning. So the benefits connecting to developmental phases, I talked about a little bit earlier, is why should we connect these things? Again, it's that vertical alignment piece. Each developmental stage is developed with the end in mind. It's that vision. Everything ties back to that vision of being physically active for life. Everything that's done in kindergarten ties into what's happening in grade 1. All those things tie into that ultimate end goal. Guides unit development. So for new teachers, physical education. The one struggle we had this year was we had teachers who were new to the content area and new to the profession. So what were we using to help guide them further? How can we keep that moving forward? And then accountability to quality. We wanted to have a quality program, so we need to have things to keep us accountable, and we need to strive towards those key indicators. Learning progression. Ensure that students are developing in domains of proximal development, making sure we're doing things that are appropriate for our students' needs. And then physical literacy is a journey and not just a one-stop shop. It's the idea that this isn't just here's not the fix-all, the end-all, be-all. This progresses further after your experience in my classroom. And then the focus on development and not execution. We're looking at, can you develop and grow, not what can you do at the end? Because the whole process behind this program was we wanted to see students grow and develop and continue to have that growth and development, because that builds the motivation to be active for life. But then there's remedial action. Allows teachers some resources for remedial action. You see that we had a lot of cross-division planning. What happens if I had a student come to me in grade 10 who's lacking, who's behind in development? This gives me the opportunity to work with the middle school teachers to get some ideas from them, to get their expertise, to help me meet that student's needs. And this offers resources for out-of-scope instruction. And that's just, what if we're given those opportunities and how can we best serve that student's needs? So going back to this concept, where every grade level is almost put into a different developmental phase, we took those phases and even developed them even further. So within each phase, we actually had physical goals. We had things that were concrete. So what was the focus of developing physical and sport capacities? We're going to be the identification of athletic lifestyle interests through multi-sport and opportunity participation, introduction to tactical play, and the understanding need to be an active lifestyle. That statement right there was the instructional planning focus for that teacher, for those students in that grade level. And then the grade 10, transition from development of physical literacy to lifelong physical activity, participation in sport, recreation, and physically active leaders. Both are very different in terms of what they want to accomplish. Both of these were the foundation for the instructional strategies. Here we look at my grade 10 class was a completely different instructional mix than my grade 9 because I'm focusing on different things to meet those students' needs. And we had this developed for every grade level. So as we went through, this really helped our teachers develop instructional strategies that were age appropriate and that had that meaningful purpose behind it. We took that developmental planning and started putting it into our units and lesson planning. Now, unit and lesson planning can often be something that's scary, or it can be something that's really fun. For me, I find it's fun, but I also like working with this stuff a lot. So with the unit lesson planning, why focusing on the why and not on the what is if you're focusing on why we're doing this, this promotes that understanding. So when students leave, they can rely on their understanding over their competency. Skills can develop over time. And skills can often be self-taught. We have YouTube, we have selfies, we have all those things where we can self-teach ourselves at what a skill can be. But if we're missing the understanding and the reasoning why we're doing this, we may never take those steps in the first place. So our approach really promoted the understanding and understanding why we're doing this. This also promotes the value behind physical activity. So communities learn from those who remain focused on why we're learning. Why are we doing this? Again, focusing back on our mission statement. Why are we trying to do this? And what do we want to see from our students at the end? Because bottom line is values are more enduring than skills. As I've gotten older, the values that I have are the same, but my physical skill is slowly declining, becoming slower and slower and slower. But my understanding as to why I'm doing this and why it's important to my lifestyle, that's enduring, and that's something that doesn't change. And now it also makes the bigger picture obvious. So students and teachers all have this understanding of what the end product is, what they should be able to do in the end, and why they're doing it in the first place. And then students can easily be part of this process. It's often moving towards a more student-centered approach, but now everybody knows what the bigger picture is. They all know the vision. They all know why we're doing this in the first place. So as I went into it, kind of my unit lesson planning follows the same structure. The connection to program focus and dimensional exploration. Okay, why are we doing this again? How does this connect to our program? How does this connect to developmental phases? And then why are we learning this? Why is this important to me? Why do I need to know this as a student? And why is this important in the end? How can we tell that progress is taking place? How can we get some feedback, use students' involvement? How can we do those things to show that progress is there? And then lastly is actually, not lastly, but then the what happens. What experiences are going to be used to learn? What are going to be the day-to-day things that we do? And then in the end, obviously, reflection. What could I do differently next time? Could it be something different to more communicate out effectively what's happening? Or could it have been something that could have been done a little bit differently? So here's an example of what my unit planning actually looks like now. And we're going to go through this, but this is a 7-page document. But in this document, it goes through why we're doing this in the first place. How can we see this is happening? How does this connect to our standards, which we're held accountable to, but from our school? And then what we're doing. These also included my daily lessons. This also included what we're going to be doing on a daily basis. How am I going to communicate out feedback to the students at that time? And also how can I be reflective in that process as well? But this document can easily be changed into this. This is what I send out to my students. This is just the one-page document, the one-page unit plan of what we're doing, why we're doing it, that idea behind it, behind the unit. So this is an example from a fundamental fitness unit, and the why. The first thing we see up there is, why are we doing this? So as I explore the fundamentals of fitness, I can develop the attitudes, values, and behavioral skills that incorporate fitness and wellness into a lifetime physical activity. That statement is met in every one of those lessons. Every one of those lessons explores that concept in a different way to show the students different understandings. How are we going to be doing this? Again, this looks at those assessment statements that we created as a department. Okay, that we have the value of physical activity. Then we're also going to be focusing on the cooperation, leadership, and social development. And in there's the criteria is, okay, the students are going to be demonstrating these things. How am I going to know that learning takes place? Is we're going to be looking at those criteria statements. What are we going to be doing? If you look at this, like the what is almost the smallest piece, because what are the learning experiences? Okay, we have team fit, rock, paper, scissors. This gives examples of what specifically is going to be happening in those lessons. And then also gives them the developmental tasks. What do I need to do to be successful? And then if you're an inquiry-based teacher, or if you're playing with the idea of inquiry-based learning, the bottom one is the questions for inquiry. What questions are we going to be asking and reflecting on throughout this unit to increase our understanding? So that 7-page document was now a 1-page document where this would be going out to parents, this would be going out to students, this would be displayed in our hallways. It gives everybody the what they need to do and why we're doing it. This ties into that whole understanding of the concept of why, the purpose behind what we're doing here. So as we break through this, and this is the first section of unit planning, is developing the why. Obviously, we'll take a look. This is an example of my floor hockey unit. Is when you're developing the why, you're connecting it to your program focus. So those key goals that were developed from the department's student developmental framework. So you look back at, okay, if I'm doing this for my grade 9 students, where's my developmental statements? This is where they need to be at. And the first thing is, how does this connect to the program? And then what's the goals that drive the development of the unit? So assessment, instructional planning. So if you look at the grade 9, the one thing I want my grade 9 students to do at the end of this unit is recognize the value of physical activity and working towards making sound personal connections. That is what I want my students to do. I don't want them to be able to do a slap shot. That's the connection to the program focus. And that's what changed as we kept going. Once we have that ironed out, we look at the dimensions of learning. So like, what are we going to be looking at? Looking at the approaches we're going to be using for instruction. So you could be using a teaching games for understanding approach. You could be using a holistic approach. This was a guide for differentiation of instruction. So the type of activities, dimensions of activities, like, okay, how am I going to be doing this? Here's my small-sided games, individual games, and cooperative games. How am I going to be looking at this in a much larger picture to increase student progress and engagement? But the number one thing at the bottom of that is the understanding of the essential idea. So as we explore the elements of floor hockey, I will develop an understanding and appreciation of elements behind respect, teamwork. This ties into those statements in the program focus. That makes that connection. So though our why statement connects to our bigger statement of why we're doing this, we want our students to be physically active for life. We want them to have the certain tools. How are they going to be doing that comes from the program focus. What they're going to be doing is going to be the day-to-day. So then how does all this unfold into place? How does this happen? And this is where that assessment criteria network comes in. Now, from that document, we wouldn't pick everything out of that because that doesn't make a meaningful connection. So these statements are taken directly from our assessment framework, but we only pick the ones that made meaningful statements and they connected to the activity that are selected. There's obviously some statements that are better suited for different activities. Not all statements can fit into a unit of instruction. It doesn't have a meaningful connection. And that's another part of this important part is we want to do this with purpose, but we want to do this with a meaningful connection. Without that meaningful connection, you miss that purpose. Now, an example of that was my swimming unit versus the volleyball unit. We decided to make our aquatics unit challenge-based. But we also wanted to make our volleyball unit more, we have students, we wanted to develop those skills. So a lot of those criterias we wouldn't be using. So if you look here with the floor hockey one, a lot of the students are kind of lacking in terms of skills of floor hockey. And at this time, so with my grade 9s, the focus wasn't actually on developing skills, it was actually developing the cooperation behind it. In grade 9, you can focus on the skills, but you're actually working on how can teams work together? How can people work together to make this game efficient? And that was the focus of our instructional strategies. How can we make this work? So participating, safety, so we have in there communication, influence, solves problems. That was the focus of what we wanted to do. And those statements actually in the end become our assessment statements for all of our assessments we would be developing. So again, we look at that. Once we have our criteria statements, specific tasks that would identify to the students what they should be able to do, we're breaking this down, making it more student-friendly as we go. So age-specific and connects to developmental focus, which again ties into those statements that we created from our pillars, which again ties into our why we're doing this, our enduring understanding, our purpose of the program. Attached to assessment rubrics, so the students do not focus on the teacher language. Because when a student reads it, looks at your rubrics, they're looking at, okay, what do I need to do? Okay, if you want to increase your movement development, you want to develop that physical domain, here's the offensive skills you should be able to do at the end of the unit. Here's the defensive skills. Here's the movement skills. Here's your safety, inclusion. Those are the values we want you to have at the end of the unit. So we would sit down and actually collaborate and build these values and make them very task specific so students can easily say, okay, I can do that. And then one of the things is we had to connect all this to our standards. Our school is very heavily standards based. This does provide a level of professional accountability. So we had to find out how we're going to connect this to the standards. So this was done later in the process. So again, the meaningful connection of the purpose can be established. We eventually took all these standards and tied them to those criteria statements. So if you take a look at our assessment criteria framework, you'll see that all these standards are linked to specific statements. So we actually, towards the end of the year, we actually just did, okay, we'll do this one time. We don't have to go back and pick these again. These are the assessment statements from the shape standards that meet this value statement. So here we're just listing, okay, here's the grade level outcomes that we have. Here's where they're going to be fitting in. Obviously, looking at this, we're not focusing on standard 2. We're actually focusing on standard 4, which is exhibit personal and responsible social behavior. And that was the focus of instruction for our floor hockey unit. Again, then once we get into that, we also took a look at the personal, social, and physical education related concepts. That's from the IB, and that's from when working in IB school is what are the bigger ideas to be walking away with? So we take a look at those. Which one of those makes a meaningful connection? Still finding out that how could we tell that progress is going to be taking place? Once all that was planned out, we actually had our assessment developed. So these are the planning tools to check for learning along the way. These could have been formative assessments. So these could have been learning checkpoints, feedback on development, summative assessments, which is a product you use to determine a mark for grades. So if we look at this, and this is my personal practice, the tools I use to determine the mark at the end are a lot. There's not as many of them as to determine learning along the way. I want the students to be part of the learning process, and I want them to understand and have tools so they can check their understanding along the way. I don't want their end unit to be an autopsy statement of what happened. I want my assessment practices to be lab reports to determine, okay, where are we lacking, where are we at, and how can I communicate that with our students? So here you can see all the different assessment tools that were there. Usually they were linked. So actually, when you go back to the unit plan, you can click on the blue links, and I'll even show you the assessment tools that were used. And an example of some of these tools were learning roadmaps. Now, this is an idea from Joey Fife from the physicaleducator.com, was take this idea of a learning roadmap is, okay, where am I at? I'm just starting, figuring it out. And this takes those skills and chunks it down even further. So this one was for floor hockey, for motivation and behavioral skills. All right, perseverance and independence, attitudes and values. What are the sort of things you could be doing? What are the task-specific criteria to show what you're doing? And this would just be this would even be put up in the locker room. Okay, where am I at in terms of my learning? This was a great conversation piece with students as well. Another one we used was Google Forms. A lot of reflective tools with Google, and it's great to have. This lets students kind of self-evaluate where they're at. Okay, are you understanding why we're doing this? This is a great check-in tool for me to make sure that the message of why we're doing this and the purpose behind it is being communicated out to my students. And then obviously our summative assessment tools. So at the end of the unit, this is what I'd be using with my students from the formative data I would collect and the kind of the checks I'd be making along the way. How can I use this to determine ultimately the end grade of the student's development of that unit? Once we have that assessment down, how am I going to see if learning is taking place? This is where I started focusing on the what. What experiences are going to be used to learn? And this is where, like my school, I was very fortunate. My previous school is they didn't ask for lesson plans for every lesson. They wanted to see planned lessons, not lesson plans. So here, this is a great way for me to start at the back and plan my last lesson and work my way into my introduction. So I even wouldn't start on what's my first lesson of the unit. What's my last lesson? What do I want to do the last day of my lesson? What is the end goal here? What do I want my students to be able to do? All right, from there, I can start working it backwards. So I start from my actual last lesson and work towards my first. Along that would be my planning with my assessments in mind. So how am I going to check for understanding along the way? So after I've planned from the end backwards to the beginning, how can that happen? How can this take place? But ultimately, it's to develop the plan that works best for you. This template works best for me because it helps me identify what we're going to be doing. I would even know I could look at my lesson plan throughout my lesson just on my phone, or we're doing introduction to floor hockey. I might have that brain fart moment where, okay, what are we doing next? I forget. And this is just a great outline of what we're doing and the activities, the learning experiences that are going to be put forward. Also, the assessments that I should be talking about throughout the day and should be using throughout that lesson. How could we be putting this out there? And then again, focusing on that inquiry question. Okay, what do you know about these things? What are the questions I'm going to be using to guide my instruction? This template obviously often works for me, but it's that recipe for effective lesson plans. And that recipe is a little bit more specific. So within every lesson, I would be looking at this. First thing is, what's the big picture, clear learning objectives? What do I want the students to accomplish at the end of that lesson? This is where we're focusing on the what, the day-to-day. How am I going to get their attention with that starter activity hook? Is it going to be a fitness game that starts with the concept in mind? Is it going to be something that reviews from a lesson before? How am I going to get their attention? How am I going to make them hooked? And then how can I inquire and put in these inquiry-based questions? We have these great things we want to do, but how am I going to have these students question why we're doing this and tie it back into the importance of being active for life? And then progressive builds. Once we have all these foundations in line, we can't play the same game for the whole class. How can I build and change the activities so that progression can be added, so that challenges can be added, taken away? How can I adapt for the learning that's taking place at the moment? And how can I apply the aspect of critical thinking? It's easy just to play the same game, be part of the same activity all lesson, and just the learning stops. It just becomes slower. But how do I add in progressions, or how do I make modifications to keep the students engaged and keep the learning progression happening? And then wrap up with closure. Closure, the last 5 minutes of class is often the most important. This is where we get to really hammer home the effect of, did learning take place, and why did we do this in the first place? It just ties that pretty bow at the end. Often, I know we're busy. We have to often move from one place to another. But that 5 minutes at the end of your lesson, of your instruction, are often the most important because it hammers home the idea of why we're doing this in the first place. It's just that important piece that we often forget about. There's my structure for the unit lesson planning. Once you go through it, for me to make that 7-page document is 2 hours of planning. That's to do it once. I go back and reflect on the process. But the planning behind it takes me 2 hours to plan out why I'm doing this, how am I going to check for understanding, and go through the what. To me, I find that's 2 hours well spent. But the important thing is this doesn't work unless I'm reflective on this process. So at the end of every unit, why am I doing this? Reflections is probably the most brushed over thing we can do as a professional. is this gives us the opportunity to reflect on the tools of the trade. Was I an effective professional? Did I meet the goals that I set forward to the students? Did the students meet those goals? What can I do differently? This also gives me an opportunity to reflect on my assessment practices. Did this work with students this time? Did this not? What changes can I make? Being reflective gives me the tools and the feedback I need so that I can make learning more meaningful for the students. But it also makes tools that fits your students' needs. What works for you may not work for best for your students. And if they don't get why they got what they got, or where they're at, or the feedback you gave them, that's an opportune time for you to reflect on what do I need to do to communicate this out more efficiently in my planning, in my execution. And then last thing is reflecting on the purpose. Are you promoting the why behind learning effectively? Like, does the purpose meet the learning needs of your students? Is your purpose developmentally appropriate? Or is this something that you need to kind of take a step back and take a look at what's going to fit the needs of my students more effectively? How this reflection could look for you could be at the end of the unit, you can sit back with your department, go out for a nice dinner, go out and have a few social beverages and talk about, okay, what did you do? What was great? How is this effective? Or it could be just a written part. In the bottom of my units, I always leave little areas, okay, what went well, what didn't go well, what do we need to change? That's the way that works best for me, but you need to find out what works best for you. And ultimately, that's how we plan for purpose. And purposeful planning just doesn't take place. It's something that takes effort. It's something that's purposeful. And there's a lot to it. It's not just an easy fix. It's not just a straightforward, here's how we do it. You do this and bam, this is purpose. There's a few steps involved. But going through and ironing out the why we're doing this, how are we going to make sure that our students are getting this message, and what we're doing to promote this message, that's as simple as it can be. And sometimes it can be a daunting task. If you have any other questions with putting purpose into your planning or the planning templates that I've used, feel free to contact me. My email is jace.ferguson@me.com. You can find me again on Twitter, Instagram, or if you take a look at my blog page, you can see some of my writings and my reflections in there on my processes as well. Again, thank you for taking your time to be part of this webinar. Thank you again for the Phys Ed Summit and everybody who's part of making this happen. If we didn't have people who put this on, we'd be missing on a great opportunity. And I would just like to thank everybody who's being part of this, all the presenters who are putting in this information, and you who are taking the time to watch this over your morning coffee, you taking the initiative to become a better teacher, a better professional for your students. Again, thank you very much. And I hope everybody has a great first weeks back into the school year. And have a good day, everybody. Thank you for listening.